I was thinking someone that was later for it.
Yeah.
Which is,
And it's not, it's like everything.
yeah, no, not that, but others. Oh, it was one that I was on the book.
What did you like? Feel like?
You know, like, you put the papers and it's like,
Oh, like that.
yeah. And
Did she say how many questions it is?
no,
Let's see it.
Okay, so we're going to start today by beginning with the Hadean. So last time when we talked, we were very briefly and somewhat sketchily going through from the Big Bang to the beginning of the formation of Earth. And now we're going to start our more in-depth walk through Earth's history and how that relates to the history of life. So what I am going to pass out to you first is some charts. So you're going to want to keep it. Color printed, nice paper, everything that I've done in my backpack my whole life. I'm trying to set us off on a good foot. And you can look these up online as well, but we're going to do an activity today where maybe in your hands, you can get more.
Yeah, but they're all like coordinated.
Okay. So this is a geologic timescale. We're starting on the right-hand side at the bottom. So we're going to be working our way up and over through each of these columns throughout the course. Okay. So we're going to start out by thinking about geologic time as a concept and kind of how to read this chart. Okay. So we do have a global standard for defining geologic time, which is what I just handed out to you. So this is set by the International Commission on Stratigraphy, the ICS. And there is a one as well that's specific to North America and kind of maps onto some of our stuff a bit better. But this one that I handed out to you is the most comprehensive. So that's what we're going to keep as our reference document. So when I look at these, that's because I'm a biologist, like I like to think about it kind of like taxonomy, dividing things into families, genuses, species, and stuff. We have these bigger buckets that we break into smaller buckets, basically is what I'm saying. So we're dividing time into what are known as geochronological units. So that's what each of the columns here basically represent. So the biggest bucket is going to be an eon. So that's going to be all the way to the left of each of these columns. Then as we move across, we're moving into eras. Then our next group are periods. Then we have epochs, and then we have ages. And each of these is defined internationally by this committee, but based on things that we can see kind of worldwide so that we can equate time when we look at geology around the Earth. Okay. So you have the modern one in your hand, but we want to think for a second about the history of creating geologic timescales. So we didn't always have an international commission, but people have been interested in geology for a long time. So here is one from 1885, and that's not a typo. Maybe you can tell by the color of this photocopy. So I want you to get used to looking at our reference copy. So I want you to view this and compare it to the color-coded one that I handed you just now and find a couple of differences. And while you're doing that, I want you to think a little bit about why people might have been interested in geologic timescales for so long. Like, some people are boring and just want to know, like me. But there are some practical reasons for this too. Who has any commentary here? Any differences?
It lists a lot of like what fossils they find with.
Yeah, it definitely does. So that's one of the pieces of evidence that they look at when they're trying to tell apart layers. They look at what you see in that layer. So this scale from the 1800s puts that on there.
They have like the
On our modern one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did anybody notice any sort of like rearrangement?
The Permian, they like here is a period, but there is like a period.
Yeah, exactly. So here you can see they have the Permian within the Carboniferous, whereas on our current scale, the Permian is moved out on its own as its own period. So a lot of the words are very similar. What? Lawnmower?
Yeah.
Does that happen? That's fine too. This is the time that they mow the grass. Okay, that's fine. Anyway, so a lot of these words are conserved. Our new modern scale is a lot longer, has a lot more words, and we do have some rearrangements. So this is kind of another way we can think about or see evidence of the fact that we change our scientific hypotheses as we get new data, right? So moving that Permian out, right, would be an example of an adjustment someone made. What about this reason for geologic scales? Anybody have any idea why people might bother with this? So one reason for this is that when we talk about some of these periods, right, like the Carboniferous, you'll see coal here, right? So one of the reasons for producing these geologic timescales and for thinking about what's in different layers and being able to tell them apart is that it's helpful for mining. If you're looking for some specific mineral or some specific rock that you want to go mine, it's helpful to know the geology. And part of that is because you can kind of predict where it might be a good idea to try and look based on the geology. So a lot of the early geologists and early timescales, for practical purposes, are doing that. Okay. All right. So there used to be more local ones because the geography of, say, Asia, Europe, North America are kind of different. There's different weather patterns at times. We have different sediments. So there used to be some scales that differ somewhat. I tried to find examples, and honestly, I cannot find super clear pictures of regional timescales from like 1600, so I don't have an example for you. But the reason they made the International Commission was so that we could equate everything evenly, so that we could start to study these periods across the globe as opposed to just in one singular place. So this is based on significant and identifiable boundaries that you can see everywhere, or that you can see globally overall. These are called horizons. So if they describe a geologic horizon, that's talking about this boundary. And they have some specific types of evidence that they look for. So you can dig into the International Commission website and find all their definitions and data. And actually this geologic timescale gets regularly updated. I think this one that we have right now, yeah, that's published in 2023. So this is most modern, but I printed out new ones for myself because the last one I had on my desk was from like 2016. So this is constantly updated with whatever new geological data they find, new dates, new rocks. They're constantly kind of revising this. So they look at some of the things that we talked about last time. So we spoke about radioisotopes and decay, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that today. We look at different chemicals, They can look at actually magnetic polarity, which is pretty neat. So like literally magnetism of the earth is a way that you can kind of help date things. They look at stratigraphy, so the layers of rock. They have a lot of different data that they're kind of piecing together, which is why they have to constantly be keeping an eye on, okay, is this still what we think? Is this still our best guess? Do we want to revise things? Okay. So there is a lot in a geologic timescale. We are going to be learning our geologic timescale. When I took a geology course, it was one of the first things they made me memorize. I'm not gonna make you guys do that right now. We're gonna just learn these different periods as we walk through them. So by the end of the course, you kind of know it. But if you're trying to wrap your heads around it in your at first, it helps to kind of work from the outside in. So to start with the biggest time grouping and then get a little closer to our little fine-tuned layers. So eons span the longest time. So they're each 500 million years or more. We currently live in the Phanerozoic, which means visible life, essentially. So the Phanerozoic eon is where you can see fossils, you can see evidence of life in the rock. The Phanerozoic is actually quite short relative to everything that came before, though. So here we can see it sort of in clock form. The Phanerozoic is in gray here, where we have fossils that we can see, and then the blue is pretty much everything else. Okay. So the three preceding eons, sometimes we talk about them together. Like often they'll kind of lump them together because those three eons are where we don't have really good fossils to look at. We can see some evidence of life, but we don't have shells, we don't have bones, we don't have really macroscopic kind of visible stuff. So if you look on your scale, you can see that the Precambrian is this column all the way to the right. I'm sorry, I have to think about right and left every time I do it. So this is our Precambrian, and you can see everything else is the Phanerozoic. That's because that's what we have more data for. So that's what we can actually say more about, break into time scales. And you can see that the oldest part of the Phanerozoic is the Cambrian period here. So that's why we're referring to all the other eons before it as the Precambrian. That's where that comes from. So we're starting with the oldest in this course. So we're going to be talking about the Hadean and moving into the Archean today, but we're going to spend relatively little time here in the Precambrian because we have less evidence about what was going on Earth. Getting to smaller scale of time. So inside our eons, we have eras. So I've pulled out our big Precambrian here with our eons within it. So then within it, we have smaller eras. These aren't such a big deal in the Precambrian, but they will be more important as we move into visible fossils, basically. So the time scale here is hundreds of millions of years. We don't have good enough instruments or techniques to look at eras within the Hadean, so we don't have any. So we really just have an eon to know for today, our Hadean eon. Okay. But once we move forward into the Phanerozoic, we'll want to know things to the era level, and then one more in, we'll be talking about periods. Your chart that I gave you has even more detail than that, has ages. We're not really going to talk at that in great detail in this course. A cool thing that is true about eras within the Phanerozoic is that our three eras that we find within the Phanerozoic, the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic, are bounded by massive extinction events. So that's really kind of how we define them, is that we see a life form that's super common up until a certain point in the geologic record, and then we have massive extinction events. Tons and tons of stuff disappears, and we start to have. So that's cool, and we'll be talking a fair bit about extinctions in this course. Okay, so once we're within our eras, we then have our periods. Okay, so the periods last tens of millions of years. So I think the most famous of them is probably the Jurassic. So the Jurassic is a period within the Mesozoic era, within the Phanerozoic eon, is how we would kind of discuss that. So we can break things down smaller, and if we were doing really specialized research, we would want to know this. So epochs are usually tens of millions of years. Ages are only a few million years. When we talk about primates and humans, we'll probably talk about epochs. But other than that, we're going to say more at periods for our older stuff. So basically, as we approach the present day, we have better data, so we can kind of study things in more fine grain. Okay. Questions about this kind of stuff? Yeah.
What's like, I guess the difference between the period and the epoch is like 10 million, you know?
It depends. Those are like kind of ranges for the length of the scale, and basically they differ in length. It's not because they're based on horizons and like what you see. It's not like every 10 million years has a period or an epoch or something. It's based on when you see a significant change. So that's kind of why. Okay. Other questions? Okay. So we're now going to do an activity to get used to kind of referencing this. And also, this could be fun, potentially fun, definitely fun for me, maybe fun for you guys. So I found an old list of fossil localities, so places they found fossils within Minnesota. And I pulled up a map of Minnesota. So we're going to go ahead and use our timescale for reference and plot them all onto our map. Make a little key so that we know the geological period, how many years old that is, the approximate age, and we're going to find out what's closest. And at words, this can be somewhere for you to go see and poke around in your own time. But if we can find something that's reasonable to get to, I'll see if we can go ahead with field trip. I don't know that we can fit that in an hour in class in the morning. So that's a TBD for us, but I have paper forms for us, or you can do this digitally. I am going to give you all at least the paper spreadsheet. Actually, who wants to do this on paper and who wants to do this on paper? Okay, cool. I'll just pass over there.
Yeah.
I did find one place that said you can go visit and you can keep any fossil smaller than your hand, but it's kind of far away. So we'll see. If you would like to color code stuff, you can